When did grocery shopping go from being routine to overwhelming? And why are we more concerned than ever about what to buy for our families? Well, today, stay tuned. You'll hear tips to shop smarter and stress less. Welcome back to Rooted and Restless. I'm your host, Marianne Smith-Edge, and today we're going from the farm and the kitchen to a place that we all go, and sometimes with despair and sometimes with concern, the grocery store. Whether we buy groceries online, in person, we still have a lot of questions. But to help us unpack those concerns and questions, I have a great colleague and friend, an award-winning nutrition communicator and registered dietitian, Kathleen Zelman, joining us. Kathleen is a contributing writer to U.S. News, World and Report, an editor and a former director of nutrition for almost 2 decades for WebMD, and a business owner of No Nonsense Nutrition. Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us from Atlanta today. We have a lot to talk about, and as a mother and a grandmother, I know you get a lot of questions and have always answered a lot of questions about what do we need to buy at the grocery store. So I'll start, what's the 101?
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Marianne. Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here. And let's be honest, it's confusing. You walk into the grocery store with good intentions, but suddenly you're staring at labels that say natural or healthy, or you have a screaming child who's hungry. The 101 on grocery shopping is first and foremost, don't ever go hungry, because your impulse to buy things really takes over your intellectual review of maybe that's not the best thing for my family. But when you enter the grocery store, it's a good idea to have a plan, have a list, because sticking to the list is usually pretty helpful. And this way also, with the cost of food going up, when you have a list, when I make my list, I'm looking at what are the BOGOs or what's on sale and trying to make my meal plan for the week around things that may be a little more affordable, a little less expensive, and we're seeing grocery prices just continue to go up. So have a plan. But in terms of choosing foods, think in terms of patterns, not perfection. I like to think about an 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time, I like to try to do the healthy, smart, wise decision. That 20% of the time those are the free foods. That's the fun food. But if you think like an 80-20 split and you focus your 80% of what's in your cart being whole or minimally processed foods, and we'll get to processed foods, you're gonna do really well. If you stick to things that you can recognize, don't have a lot of extra ingredients for the most part, you're gonna find that your cart is full of super nutritious foods. And use the store as a layout. So don't think you only have to shop around the perimeter. That's a fallacy. There are lots of very nutritious items inside the center aisles. They're packaged and you have to use more discretion. But things like oats, they don't come right out of the field. They have to be processed. But that's an example of a minimally processed food. But they're in the middle of the aisles. A can of beans, you're not going to take beans out of the field and be able to eat them. They have that minimal process. So there's lots of good foods in the center aisles. You need to be careful about the additives, and we'll get to that too. So simple rule for going to the grocery store is if it looks like it's kind of in its original form, like an apple or chicken or oats, it's easier to trust. If it's heavily altered, you need to check it a little bit more carefully. And remember, it doesn't always have to be fresh. That frozen, canned, dry, those are all good variations. And sometimes things like frozen vegetables, they're going to be less expensive. They were frozen at the time that they were picked. So it's like quick frozen, super healthy. So don't think it always has to be fresh in order for it to be healthy. So now we're in the grocery store and you need to read labels. So reading labels really matters until you figure out, okay, this is my marinara sauce. I've already checked it. And when you go to the grocery store, you just grab it. But when you're choosing new things, you need to take a few minutes to look at the ingredient list. So keep in mind the ingredient list requires glasses if you wear them because the print is so small.
And I do need glasses.
Yeah, I can't go without the glasses. And they're listed by weight. So the item within your marinara sauce that weighs the most is going to be the first ingredient. So if it's a tomato-based marinara sauce, you want that first ingredient to be tomatoes, not water. So you also realize you get more for your money when you start sleuthing the ingredient list to see, wait a minute, is this a filler? The very first ingredient is a filler. So remember, by weight from the most to the least. Now, there are these rumors that you should only buy foods that have 3 ingredients. That's a fallacy. You don't want, typically, you don't want a big long list of ingredients. But sometimes, you're going to have 3, 5, 7 ingredients, and sometimes it's a additive that's keeping the food on the shelf so you don't have to go to the grocery store every day. So there are no specific rules. Less is usually better. When you're comparing things and you see that there's lots of extra ingredients, you might want to pare back to the one that's appears to have fewer. But look for recognizable foods, oats, milk, tomatoes. When those are in the ingredient list, it's usually they're everyday staples that are beneficial. Okay, now while you're reading the ingredient list, you have to check the nutrition facts panel. And as parents, grandparents, the kinds of nutrients we want to focus on, things like protein. The new dietary guidelines is recommending we get more protein. Most people get plenty, don't need to worry about adding more. But the advantage of protein is it helps keep kids full. So it's one of those ingredients that you want to make sure you have at breakfast, at snack, at lunch, and at dinner, because that's going to give the satiety. And so maybe the hands won't be in the cookie jar or searching for a snack because they'll be satisfied. So protein's an important one on the facts panel to check and make sure you have a good source of protein. Another one is fiber. Most adults and definitely most children don't get enough fiber. And fiber is so important for digestion, and it also adds to fullness, the fullness factor. And what we're learning about the microbiome, which is your gut health, your internal health, is fed by fiber. So if you have a diet that's rich in fiber, you will keep that microbiome or your gut health really healthy with good, healthy bacteria. So it helps with digestion, elimination, fullness, and feeding the microbiome. So fiber is critically important, and you find it naturally in things like beans, oats, fruits, vegetables. So there's all kinds of great foods in the grocery store to be putting in your cart that are going to contribute fiber.
And I would say, Kathleen, the one thing that you've talked about is that addressing the protein and the fiber, it goes back to kind of the everyday foods. It's not like having to look for something that's been created that's going to give more protein and fiber.
Natural is usually, we'll get to that term too, but if you're finding there's so many processed foods out there, and so I see it with my kids, they want these snack bars, these granola bars, and sometimes the labeling is really very catchy, and it makes you think like, wow, this is as good as eating, an apple with some peanut butter. But if I had my choice, I'd rather give the child an apple with some peanut butter. Apple is natural. You can buy peanut butter. You can buy peanut butter with nuts in it already. So it's crunchy, get a little bit more fiber. You can even get lower sugar, which brings me to our next point.
Sugar.
Sugar is, blamed for a lot. And basically, when we're talking about sugar, we're talking about added sugar or sucrose. So the table sugar that you find on your table, it's empty calories. It really doesn't serve any nutritional purpose. Now, sometimes a little bit of sugar helps the medicine go down so that, a little sweetness might help you eat other foods better. So, for example, if you bought plain yogurt instead of the fruit at the bottom or flavored with added sugar, and you use some natural things like fresh fruit or dried fruit or a little bit of cereal, you could maybe then take that plain yogurt and make it into a good snack by adding other ingredients, adding some nuts. So do whatever you can to try to stick with the simpler versions, add where you need to, because there's not a problem to have added sugar, but think of that 80-20 rule. And I like to think about certain foods as vehicle foods. So something like cereal. Cereal, okay, maybe there's a little added sugar in the cereals that your kids like, but that cereal, you're going to put milk on it. So there's a super nutritious food that's high in protein. You're going to put some fruit on top of that cereal. So now all of a sudden you have a bowl of cereal. Yes, it's got some added sugar, but you also have milk or maybe yogurt and some fruit, fresh fruit, dried fruit. And then, it becomes a very nutritious meal. And that little bit of sugar helped the medicine go down. So we don't want to say no sugar at all, but you need to learn how to sleuth it out on labels. So luckily, labels changed a couple of years ago, and there's now a line on that nutrition facts panel that says added sugar. So it identifies when it's an added sugar as opposed to when it's a carbohydrate. So some people get confused when they look at let's say, chocolate milk. You look at chocolate milk and it's going to have added sugar. That's what gave it its chocolate flavor. But the other sugar carbohydrate line is from the lactose, which is a type of sugar in the dairy product. So don't let those numbers confuse you because it's high in carbohydrates. That's not the problem. Where you really want to focus your energy is on the added sugar line. So focus on added sugar. Try to keep it low for those everyday foods. And see where you can find things like lower sugar versions of your favorite. So peanut butter. Sometimes check the labels on barbecue sauce and ketchup and some of the hidden sources of sugar where kids can get and adults can get extra sugar that they don't really need.
Well, I'm glad you really mentioned this cereal because I think cereal has kind of gotten in the crossfires of processed foods, and to your point, it definitely is that great vehicle for added milk and fiber, and a great snack. So it's kind of like using common sense, in that particular area. So maybe I said process, you said process. Maybe it's a good time to talk about because the whole concept of pros.
Just as an example, that when my kids were young, I would buy the plain, no added sugar cereal, and then I'd let them pick their treat cereal, although I never let them pick things that had, funny colors and marshmallows. But, they would get their favorite cereal and they would use it as a topper. So the base of the bowl was always the plain Wheaties or, Cheerios. And then they could put a couple of tablespoons of the sweetened cereal. So, just the combination made it work. So, okay, that's it.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Cereal, what I love about cereal, it's a great snack too. You mentioned that, but it's fortified. So that what the cereal makers typically do is add all of these vitamins and minerals to cereal. So they're adding iron and they're adding riboflavin. And so granted, it's added, doesn't mean that it's not healthy, but it also just adds to the completeness and the health factor of a bowl of cereal. So I'm a big fan of cereal, and but let's move on because we want to talk about processed foods, but we still have to talk about some of those other terms.
Yeah.
Think of processing like a spectrum meaning that there's one end of the spectrum that's minimally processed. That's milk. We don't drink milk from a cow. It has to be processed. The oats, we talked about the beans, baby carrots. All those things are minimally processed to get them into the shape. And also understand that processing means any kind of adaptation, any kind of manipulation. So that not directly from the field or from the tree, but it's been a chicken breast that has been sliced into thin sliced chicken breast is processed because it's been changed from the original form. So processing is not a bad term, but the spectrum goes from the examples I just gave you all the way to highly processed bars that have long lists of ingredients. Typically, those highly processed foods are high in fat, high in sodium, high in sugar. So we don't want to be on the end of the ultra processed foods or highly processed foods. We want to stay closer to the end of minimally and moderately. So some examples are minimally processed, a frozen vegetable, yogurt, whole grain bread. Those are minimally processed, super healthy. I don't want you to think for a minute that you shouldn't be eating that. Now, in the moderately processed food, which is totally fine on balance, are things like pasta and sauces and cereals. We just had a big discussion. And then the area where you really need to limit is the ultra processed foods. And these were also called out on the new dietary guidelines, although without much definition. So the problem here is that these are the sugary drinks and the fast food and packaged snacks, but we don't really have a way to identify them at this point. There's a system that's out there that has been used for years that is a flawed system in terms of how to help you choose when you're at the grocery store. The good news is USDA is working on trying to determine a way to help consumers figure out within this spectrum where is it okay, what green, yellow, red light kinds of foods. So I think we'll get more information, but understanding labels, looking at ingredient lists, looking at nutrition facts panels, all those things will really help you figure out where's the ultra processed foods. And they tend to be the convenience foods, the ones that are grab and go. And they tend to be the foods that are also kind of addictive, that sugar and that salt that you just want more and more of. Did that answer your question, Marianne?
It does. And one question I might say, you're right on, obviously on the ingredients, but sometimes, some of the foods can have, like plant-based type foods can have a lot of ingredients in them, and they are definitely processed, the protein alternative. But to your point, they're not necessarily high in sugar, but so that's where I think they're not high in sugar. So that is where sometimes I think when we get down to the definition and can be kind of confusion. Yeah.
You did a nice piece in one of your newsletters on comparing those plant-based burgers and, looking across the table at, how many calories, how many grams of protein, and how much sodium. And you'll find that maybe it's made from plants, but it's ultra processed.
Exactly. Now let's hear from Mindy Herman, registered dietitian, food and nutrition writer and the guru on all the latest food trends.
Hi, Marianne and Kathleen. Let's take a look at the findings from a few surveys conducted in the U.S. by the International Food Information Council, or IFIC. In its 2025 surveys, IFIC found that Americans are more interested in hearing about what and how to eat rather than how not to eat. How well do Americans think they're doing? A majority grade their own diet as a B- or better, but fewer say that the other guy's diet makes the grade. American consumers say that they use information on food and beverage packaging, led by the expiration date, nutrition facts panel, and list of ingredients. Sadly, confidence in the safety of the U.S. food supply is at an all-time low. When asked why, survey participants say that they believe companies put profits ahead of safety, and they don't think everyone in the U.S. food system is working together to keep our food safe. What do you think?
Now, let's return to our conversation. You explained it well, and I think that's where, obviously, we have a little background, and it still can be confusing, and so totally understand. But I think the fact is, think about, what are the key ingredients, and maybe that's where, we can move to talk about those other ingredients, kind of like. People get a little nervous when, they say if you can't pronounce it. Well, I can't pronounce a lot of things. That doesn't mean it's bad, but additives, let's throw out additives, preservatives, some of those type of things that everyone sort of has, a top of mind, a little concern.
Well, I think it goes back to the popular term of clean eating, that people want to eat clean. Well, no one wants to eat dirty. So if the opposite of clean is dirty, it doesn't make much sense. And that's a term that's not regulated. So it's just been thrown out there by influencers. Choosing foods that are minimally processed and closer to their natural state is really what clean eating is. But it doesn't, and for the most part, you're eating more fruits and vegetables and whole grains and brown rice and quinoa and lean proteins. It's eating healthy. It really is. And clean eating is eating less of those highly processed foods, fewer foods that are high in sugar, fewer refined carbs. That's like white bread and pastries and, white flour, and artificial additives. So when it comes to additives and preservatives, they have a role in our food supply, and an essential one. We would be going to the grocery store every day if we didn't have them. We would waste so much money on food loss if we didn't have additives and preservatives. So there's a place for them. And I know the fear is really high, but nuance matters here. The additives that are beneficial and safe mostly are preservatives that prevent spoilage and foodborne illnesses. Because think about it. Think about if you had to worry about every time you ate something, whether or not it was safe. These preservatives keep it safe for us. Fortification, like I mentioned with the cereal, they add nutrients. I mean, we have eradicated certain diseases because we've added fortified milk with vitamin D. We have fortified grains with B vitamins. These things have been really crucial in terms of how they have protected our country, our people. So ascorbic acid might sound like, something scientific. That's vitamin C. So it's just another term for vitamin C, and it will prevent foods from getting brown. So that some things are treated with it, so you could have those little apples, sliced apples, to pop into a lunchbox and they don't turn brown, because what kid's going to eat a brown looking apple? So it's not harmful. It's vitamin C. It's helpful. Calcium carbonate is something that's added to, like, if you prefer plant beverages to dairy beverages, or you can't tolerate dairy, you're lactose intolerant, then we can help make those plant-based beverages almost as good as milk, cow's milk. And that's by adding calcium carbonate, because it boosts the calcium in foods. Calcium is another one of those nutrients that we need to make sure we get enough of. You might have heard of lecithin. It helps with the texture, so that Some foods, if they're frozen or they're canned, that the texture can break down, but this enables the texture to remain pleasant and desirable. Some additives to be mindful of. So not that you need to eliminate them completely, but if you consume them in excess, it could be of concern. Artificial colors. So I know you've read about it. There's been a lot of attention on red dye number 40, yellow number 5, yellow number 6, and blue number 1. They're unnecessary. They're not doing anything to add to the safety, add to the shelf life, add to the texture. They're just there for color's sake. So they're not really needed. And if you can find ways to eliminate that, I say that's a good thing. I try very hard not to get any of those colors to my little grandchildren. There's other candies and there's other ways to have treats without having to go with the artificial colors. And I would say the other additives to be mindful of, highly engineered flavor enhancers. Are they necessary? High levels of added sugars or sweeteners. Those kinds of ingredients are not adding to the nutritional goodness, not adding to the safety, not adding to the shelf life. So, there's a lot. We could do a whole session on additives and preservatives, but by and large, get out your phone when you're there and look up the particular one that you're concerned about and get a response, and maybe you'll realize, oh, this is serving a good purpose. And all of the additives and the preservatives have passed muster in terms of meeting federal guidelines to make sure that they're not toxic at the levels that they're being used.
I think that's important is as you said, is if you can eliminate it, but also know that at times when the conversation is around, oh, it could be cancer causing or it can be toxic, is it comes into levels. And so when you're talking
about dose,
it's the dose.
And sometimes actually, you're talking about like a grain of salt in a swimming pool.
Exactly.
It's not, you're not going to be consuming the amount that's required that could potentially give you some backlash.
So the key is, as you said, when there's an opportunity and you can avoid it, do so, but don't get like excited and fearful that if there's a food that's got blue in it, that's going to be dangerous.
Right. And you know what? Moderation. If it's a treat food and it's not a regular part of your diet, doesn't really concern me. I think, that 80-20 rule is kind of my Bible for just trying to 80% of the time, keep it the foods that we recognize, that we know are good, that we know are on that lower end of the processing spectrum. And then those treat foods, it's good. It's all good. But before we leave this conversation, I have to talk about some other terms you're going to see in the grocery store that really can cause confusion. So terms like healthy, natural, organic, GMO-free, these are common terms that you need to know about so that you can make good choices. Good news is healthy is now a defined criteria. So if a food gets to carry that label, carry that marketing that it's healthy, it has to contain a certain amount of food from at least one of the food groups, like fruits or vegetables, grains, proteins, and it has to meet specific limits for added sugar, saturated fat, and sodium. So mostly, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, dairy, nuts, seeds, peas, beans, they're all going to be safe. Even if they add water to them, they get to be designated as healthy. The new healthy claim allows things like avocados, salmon, olive oil, and nuts to also carry that claim. So I'm thrilled with the updated claim, because previously things like avocados, because of the fat content, although the fat content is healthy fat, but still was the total fat, eliminated it. Likewise with the olive oil. So The healthy claim is now one you can trust. Now, when it comes to natural, it not so much. There is not a standard definition for natural. So think of it as a marketing term, not as one that you can believe means you're getting a superior product or a healthier product. USDA regulates meat and poultry and eggs. That's it. They don't regulate the other food ingredients. And they have now established that natural for only those things, meat, poultry, and eggs. Natural means that there are no artificial ingredients, there's no added color, and it's minimally processed. So you can trust meat, poultry, and egg products that say that they're natural, but all the others, you just need to use your read the labels, look at the ingredient lists. But keep in mind, something that says natural is not necessarily nutritionally better. It doesn't necessarily mean there are no additives or it's GMO free or that it's organic. So natural is one that you still need to be cautious about. Organic, on the other hand, has a seal. And if you see the USDA organic seal, it means that the product is organic. If it says 100% organic, that means that 100% of the ingredients are organic. If it just says organic, it means at least 95% of the ingredients are organic. Then you might see some labels that say made with organic, and that there's no seal there, and that means 70% of the ingredients are organic. And these terms are regulated, so you can trust that. But keep in mind that even organic foods can use chemicals, can use pesticides. There's select ones that they're allowed to use, but it's not 100% pure in terms of having no chemicals on the product whatsoever. So it's, you have to choose what's important to you. I always tell people that it's far more important to eat lots of fruits and vegetables than to worry about whether or not they're organic. Always wash them. Washing is good. Even things like cantaloupe, where, you want to wash the skin because when you slice into it, you could potentially pass along bacteria. But fruits and vegetables are far more important than worrying about organic. And if you can afford organic and that's your preference, absolutely enjoy. Now, GMO free. These labels can be very confusing because they mix science and marketing and regulation. But what it means is GMO free really means that GMO means genetically modified organisms. So it means that there are not any ingredients within the product that have been genetically modified. A GMO-free label means the product is made without any of those engineered ingredients. You might see a non-GMO project. There's a label that has like a little butterfly on it. I'm not sure how regulated that is, but what I want you to understand about GMOs is that there are a lot of ingredients that are within our food supply, have been in our food supply for about 20 years or more, that contain genetically modified ingredients. And so it's kind of when you genetically modify an ingredient, instead of letting the natural course take place of how plants crossbreed, this is kind of a fast track to it. So it doesn't affect its nutritional value. Oftentimes GMO corn, for example, they have genetically modified it so it resists disease infiltration. So the farmer makes more money, has fewer diseased stalks of corn, for example. So just know that GMO-free doesn't mean that the product is free of additives or preservatives or highly processed foods or is any more nutritious. So that I hopefully will help you. We've talked about clean eating, and I think understanding processing and what it means, keeping that spectrum in mind is really important, so that you don't think all things processed are evil, because they're not. And even if you eat those bars that are on the highly end, if you follow that 80-20 rule, you're going to be just fine. So I think before I leave you, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about things like snacks that kids are, most kids need snacks. They need to
Right.
eat more than 3 times a day. And this is where some parents feel like they get stuck, like they want balance, but what is the perfect snack? So fruit and yogurt and cheese sticks and crackers, whole grain crackers, preferably popcorn. Popcorn's a great snack. It's a whole grain. So that's really good. Peanut butter. Peanut butter is one of my favorite snacks. I put it on, celery, on carrots, on apples. It makes anything taste better. And sometimes packaged snacks, they're okay. Just try to, I tell my daughter-in-law, try to make up little bags of trail mix and put the things in there as opposed to buying it. Make it up, let the kids help you, make little snack packs to put in their lunch or for after school. The goal is to just try to control the sugar, control the salt, control that processing. But we don't want to make sugar this forbidden fruit and so irresistible that, kids are always craving it. So I say, let's not talk about sugar as bad. There's a place for it, enjoy it sometimes, but it's an extra thing. And if you find that having sweet stuff in your house is too tempting for you or for your children or grandchildren, then make it a treat that on Saturdays we go out to get ice cream. Or you say, we get to have dessert on Tuesday nights and Friday night, or, have some rules and regulations that help the kids understand that, this is a sometimes food and we can enjoy it. And, like we don't want to prompt this feeling that, I want this food so badly. Sweets, but kids love sweets. There's no question about it. And I think if you can control it and, try to have wherever you can pair sweets like with fruit. So make it a fruit dessert. I tell my grandchildren all the time, fruit is nature's candy. We pop grapes in the freezer. They're like, and they love it. Frozen watermelon, frozen pineapple. Sometimes just having that little frozen makes it taste more like a treat, or but the sweetness is there. And maybe you can top it with a little something, a little ice cream. Have a bowl of fruit with a little bit of ice cream on the top. So sweets are part of, kids want them, and most kids can afford those extra calories. Keep in mind these, what added sugar in general is just those empty calories. And when you do pair it with real food, it helps stabilize blood sugar, and it helps reducing overeating of the sweets, because there's a feeling of fullness. So
Well,
my 2 cents on the sugars.
no, I think you've put it in. I would say you've given us so much information, and I share your viewpoints so well. Is that I think the key here is, if we summarize, and you can tell me, is I love the thought of the 80-20, because you're probably like me. I'm always like, okay, what do I have in my cart that someone's going to go, oh, she's a dietitian, was she? And
Marianne, like you said, you agree with me. I would venture to say that most dietitians, most registered dietitians, nutritionists would not take issue with anything that we've discussed today. This is kind of our playbook to help people.
Exactly. And the reality is, if anything, is like, you've given some really good guidelines. And yes, you may not have time to read every label, but I think that the top line is, again, looking for whole foods, whether it's fresh, frozen, or canned, is perfect, but also not to be as I guess some of the processing, as you mentioned too, is not to be so concerned when we get to just the term in itself. It makes a big difference on that. So kind of your parting, your bottom line.
A simple decision filter for parents, that just what's it made of? How often will we be eating it? And does it add value? So just kind of thinking when you're picking a product, a couple of quick questions to help you decide, especially if you don't have a lot of time. But be strategic in the grocery store. Like I said, don't ever go hungry. I try not to do that because I see what happens when you.
Yeah, I've been there.
Right, and bring the kids with you. Let them pick out one or two fun items. Let them, help look at where is the added sugar? How much added sugar? Can you find a box of cereal that has less than 5 grams of added sugar? So teach them about the importance of those kinds of things. And what really matters most, the big picture, parents, is what are we eating? Look at dietary patterns. Look at, you don't have to micromanage every single meal, but look at the whole day, look at the whole week. Are we getting enough fiber? Are we eliminating some of those highly processed foods? Are we avoiding, excess additives? And try to go for variety, go for balance. I mean, we want convenience because we all need convenience, but don't shop for perfect, shop for better. Marianne and I have a great friend, Elizabeth Ward, who has a newsletter that she calls Better is the New Perfect. Just try to be better. Try to move your dietary habits in the right direction. Get your kids on board. Now with summer approaching, plant some vegetables. If you can plant fruits or vegetables in your yard, that's a great way to get kids involved. Get them in the kitchen. And don't just look at the front of the package when you're at that grocery store. Flip it over and look at the back. So just that you're really trying to take in the information. And once you've made the decision of, okay, this is my choice for cereal or whatever, you don't have to go through this again. So just do your best. And parents, you need to model the behavior. So this matters probably more than any of the rules, that kids watch you and how you talk about food and what you eat and how many sweets you eat and how you handle cravings. All those things are being absorbed by your children. And so being a role model for healthy eating and making good choices is your best bet.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. I think you said better. It's not about perfection. It's about doing better. 80-20. And it's what we've always said. Everything in moderation in some point. It may not always sound exciting, but it's actually reality, and it works. And we can feel hopefully confident and not so fearful if we walk into the grocery store.
Right. And, kids absorb this. I was with my little grandchildren, and we were out and somebody ordered bacon and they wanted to know, is bacon good for you? It's like, well, it's not necessarily the top choice, but now and again, you can have a little bacon. So, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And I remember as a young dietitian thinking, oh, heaven forbid, bacon. Well, nothing's off the table as long as you follow that 80-20 and you do the moderation. You can indulge in those things and just let it be less often, infrequent, and then it's fine.
Well, thank you. Hopefully this gives us a little bit more confidence that grocery shopping shouldn't be overwhelming, but especially when we walk in with some guidelines and as you said, a list and looking at that there are a lot of more better options than not. So thank you
for having me.
Thank you again, Kathleen. Always a pleasure. And here's to our health and to more fun shopping.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening, Rooted and Restless. It's all about digging deeper into the behind the scenes about food, agriculture, and nutrition, because after all, every food has a story, and sometimes it's not as simple as it seems. Subscribe to Rooted and Restless wherever you listen to podcasts or find us on YouTube.